Princess finally meets the human who saved her years ago. Her declaration shocked everyone. The grand ballroom of the Galactic Alliance headquarters buzzed with activity as delegates from across the known systems gathered for the annual Peace Summit. Princess Lyra of the Altarian Empire stood at the center of attention, wearing her ceremonial robes of deep purple and silver. Her violet eyes scanned the crowd with practiced grace, though her heart raced with nervous anticipation. Today was different from all the other diplomatic gatherings she had attended over the years. Among the sea of alien faces and elaborate costumes, she searched for one particular being. The human delegation had arrived that morning, and somewhere in this vast assembly was the person who had changed the course of her life 15 years ago. She had been just 7 years old, then a frightened child lost in the chaos of war on the frontier world of Nexus Prime. The memories came flooding back as she stood there. The rebel attack on the mining colony where she had been visiting with her father. The explosions that had separated her from her guards. The 3 days she had spent hiding in the ruins of a collapsed building, too terrified to move. She could still remember the sound of approaching footsteps, and how she had pressed herself deeper into the shadows, expecting the worst. Instead of the rough voices of rebels, she had heard something entirely different. A gentle human voice speaking in broken Altarian, asking if anyone was hurt. The young human soldier had found her there dirty and scared, and had immediately knelt down to her level. He had removed his helmet, revealing a kind face with brown eyes and dark hair. His uniform was torn and blood-stained, but his smile had been warm and reassuring. Captain Marcus Webb of the Human Defense Corps had stayed with her for 2 days until rescue arrived. He had shared his rations and fresh water with her. He had told her stories about Earth and its blue skies and green forests. He had taught her simple human words and phrases. Most importantly, he had kept her safe when rebel scouts had passed dangerously close to their hiding spot. When the rescue ships had finally arrived, Marcus had refused any reward or recognition. He had simply smiled and told her to be brave, and to remember that the universe was full of good people who would help her if she ever needed it. Then he had disappeared back into the war, leaving behind only a small metal tag with his name and service number that had fallen from his pocket. Now 15 years later, Princess Lyra held that same metal tag in her hand as she searched the crowd. She had kept it all these years, and had made inquiries through diplomatic channels about the human who had saved her. The responses had been vague and bureaucratic. The Human Defense Corps had been disbanded after the war. Records were scattered. Many veterans had simply vanished into civilian life on distant worlds. But last month, everything had changed. A routine diplomatic exchange had included a manifest of the human delegation. Among the names of ambassadors and trade representatives was one that made her heart stop. Marcus Webb, listed as a special advisor on frontier security. The boy who had saved her had grown into a man and was coming to the summit. The evening reception was about to begin, and Princess Lyra moved through the crowd with renewed purpose. She had practiced this moment in her mind countless times, but now that it was here, she felt as nervous as that 7-year-old girl hiding in the ruins. What would she say to him? How could she possibly express what his kindness had meant to her? Near the main entrance, she spotted the human delegation. They were easy to identify by their simple black formal, wear in stark contrast to the elaborate costumes of other species. Her eyes moved from face to face, searching for familiar features aged by 15 years. Then she saw him. Marcus Webb stood near the edge of the group, listening politely to a conversation between 2 alien diplomats. His dark hair was now streaked with gray, and his face bore the lines of experience and responsibility. But his eyes were the same warm brown she remembered, and when he smiled at something, one of the diplomats said she knew without doubt that this was her rescuer. Princess Lyra approached slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. The diplomatic protocols she had learned over the years seemed to evaporate as she drew closer. This was not just another state function or carefully choreographed meeting. This was personal. This was the moment she had dreamed about for 15 years. Marcus noticed her approach and straightened slightly. Recognition flickered across his face, but she could see uncertainty there as well. 15 years was a long time, and she had changed from a frightened child into a woman. She stopped just a few feet away, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the space that separated them. Then Princess Lyra reached into her small ceremonial purse and withdrew the metal tag. She held it up so he could see it clearly. The uncertainty in his eyes vanished instantly and was replaced by amazement and something that looked like joy. The conversation around them gradually died away as other delegates noticed the interaction. Princess Lyra was acutely aware that they were becoming the center of attention, but she did not care. She had waited too long for this moment to worry about protocol or propriety. Marcus stepped forward and extended his hand. She placed the metal tag in his palm and watched as he examined it with wonder. His fingers traced the worn edges and faded lettering. When he looked up at her again, his eyes were bright with emotion. The ballroom had grown quiet now, and Princess Lyra could feel hundreds of eyes upon them. Representatives from dozens of worlds watched with curiosity and growing amazement as the pieces of the story began to fall into place. Many of them knew the legend of the lost princess and her mysterious human rescuer. The story had become something of a fairy tale told throughout the galaxy. Marcus seemed to realize that they had an audience, and he glanced around uncertainly. But Princess Lyra had made her decision. She had not come this far to let embarrassment or political considerations stop her now. She had something to say, and she was going to say it regardless of who was listening. Taking a deep breath, she stepped closer to Marcus and spoke in a clear voice that carried across the silent ballroom. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of 15 years of gratitude and something deeper that she had only recently allowed herself to acknowledge. The princess began to speak, and her declaration would indeed shock everyone present. But more than that, it would change the course of galactic history in ways that none of them could have imagined. For sometimes the smallest acts of kindness have the greatest consequences, and the love of a princess can move mountains, or in this case, entire star systems. Marcus stood frozen as her words washed over him. He had been a soldier following orders when he had found her in those ruins. He had done what any decent person would have done. He had never expected recognition or reward. He certainly had never expected this. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as Princess Lyra continued to speak. Her voice was strong and clear, carrying across the vast ballroom without the need for amplification. She spoke of gratitude and honor and duty, but also of something far more personal and profound. Ambassador Chen of the Terran Federation felt his jaw drop as he began to understand the implications of what he was hearing. The economic and political ramifications alone would be staggering, but beyond the practical considerations was something far more significant. This was about the power of human compassion to transcend species and cultural boundaries. The Altarian delegation looked equally stunned. Princess Lyra had not consulted with them before making this declaration. They had known about her search for the human soldier, but they had assumed it was simply a matter of offering formal recognition or perhaps a medal. This was something else entirely. Marcus finally found his voice and tried to speak, but Princess Lyra raised her hand to stop him. She was not finished yet, and she needed to say everything while she still had the courage. The words came easier now, as if a dam had burst inside her chest. She spoke of the impact that his kindness had on her life, how his example had shaped her understanding of what it meant to be a leader. how his stories of Earth had inspired her to study human culture and philosophy, how his simple act of caring for a frightened child had given her hope in the darkest moments of her life. The audience was completely silent, now hanging on every word. Even the normally restless youngsters in the diplomatic corps stood perfectly still as they witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. A princess of one of the most powerful empires in the known galaxy was publicly declaring her feelings for a human soldier. But Princess Lyra was not finished yet. She had saved the most important part for last. Taking another step closer to Marcus, she looked directly into his eyes and spoke words that would echo through the halls of power for generations to come. She declared that she had fallen in love with him, not just with the memory of the kind soldier who had saved her, but with the man he had become. She had followed his career from afar, learning about his work with refugee resettlement and his advocacy for war orphans. She had seen the man of honor and compassion that the boy had grown into. The gasps and murmurs from the crowd were audible now, but Princess Lyra ignored them. She was speaking only to Marcus now, and the rest of the galaxy could listen if they chose. She told him that she had arranged for him to be invited to the summit specifically so she could find him again. She told him that she had been searching for him for years, and then she asked him the question that brought complete silence back to the ballroom. She asked him if he would consider allowing her to court him, according to both human and Altarian custom. She asked if he would give her the chance to show him that her feelings were genuine, and not just the gratitude of a child grown up. Marcus stood there in shock, his mind reeling from what he had just heard. Around them, the assembled delegates of the Galactic Alliance stood equally stunned. In all the centuries of interstellar diplomacy, nothing like this had ever happened before. Royal marriages were matters of state policy and careful negotiation. They were not declarations of love made in public by love-struck princesses. But Princess Lyra had never been a conventional royal. Her upbringing had been shaped by the trauma of war and the memory of human kindness. She had grown up believing that love and honor were more important than political expediency. And now she was putting those beliefs into practice in the most public way possible. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Marcus looked around at the sea of faces surrounding them, and then back at the princess who stood before him with her heart in her eyes. He thought about the frightened little girl he had protected all those years ago, and the remarkable woman she had become. Finally he spoke, and his words were as simple and honest as hers had been. He told her that he had never forgotten her either, that he had often wondered what had happened to the brave little princess who had shared his rations and listened to his stories about Earth. He told her that he had been proud to learn of her accomplishments and her reputation as a fair and compassionate leader. And then he smiled that same warm smile she remembered from 15 years ago, and told her that he would be honored to accept her courtship. The ballroom erupted in gasps and excited chatter as the implications of what they had just witnessed began to sink in. Princess Lyra felt tears of joy spring to her eyes as she heard his acceptance. She had taken the greatest risk of her life, and it had paid off. The man who had saved her life had just agreed to let her try to win his heart. Everything else, the political complications, the diplomatic ramifications, the shocked reactions of the assembled delegates, could be dealt with later. For now, in this moment, she was just a woman who had found the man she loved and discovered that he was willing to give her a chance. The fairy tale was just beginning, and she could hardly wait to see where it would lead them both. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, questions, and barely controlled chaos as the news of the Princess Declaration spread throughout the summit. But Princess Lyra barely noticed any of it. She had eyes only for Marcus as they stood together at the center of the storm they had created. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would they. But sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest acts of kindness and the courage to follow your heart, no matter who might be watching. Princess Lyra had learned that lesson 15 years ago from a human soldier, and tonight she had put it into practice in front of the entire galaxy. The story of the princess and the soldier would be told for generations to come, and it would inspire countless others to believe in the power of love to overcome any obstacle. But that night, in the ballroom of the Galactic Alliance headquarters, it was just the beginning of a love story that would change the course of history itself.